Well, welcome back. This is your lecture for Unit 2, and this unit you're doing readings regarding population control and reproductive rights. Now, last unit you read about, or in the lecture we covered social construction, norms, social context, and framing in regards to sex and gender and sexuality and gender constructions. And so hopefully you understood those well, because this week we're going to be sort of building on those concepts and growing from them as we think about population control and reproductive rights. So a common question that we think of, that you may have thought about, or maybe someone has asked you when they heard that you're taking this class, is why women's studies? And then the next question that comes up is, what about men's studies? Why isn't there men's studies? Now, the way that I like to answer that is that the dominant way of seeing, or the norm in the US and globally in most places, because we are a patriarchy, is to understand from what would be a male perspective. That would be the normative perspective. So when you take a history class, or you learn about science or politics or religion or philosophy, and I know this sounds really extreme, but you'll learn more about it and you'll see it in a more refined manner as we go through the semester. But when you learn any of those things, you're learning it foundationally through a male perspective, through the perspective of coming from a context of patriarchy, which means that it's male dominant, or that masculinity is considered the norm. So last week we talked about what norms were and who were norms, and those norms, by getting to be considered normal, you get to construct our politics, our religion, our philosophy, and that gives you power. And so as we look at patriarchy, we are going to be talking a lot about power, and I want you to think about what kind of power comes with being the norm, and what kind of disempowerment comes from not being the norm. And now this doesn't mean that if you're a man you have all the power, or if you're a woman you have no power. And that's why I call it patriarchies, because this is about systems, not so much about individual people. I have a husband. He's a great guy. I love him, and I don't, greet him at the door with, why did you take all my power? It's a lot more of a careful balance than that, and I don't, and we'll slowly look at that, and if you have questions, always, of course, contact me. So the main thing is that this is a system, a male-dominated system, that defines the way we think about normal through sort of a male gaze. So here we have looking through a little telescope and seeing sort of a male vision of the world. So why women's studies? Because we've grown up seeing a pretty male vision of the world, and the other things that are considered normal are things like Christianity is the norm, whiteness is the norm, being straight is the norm, and don't worry, we'll talk about all of those things and why they're considered the norm. But if you think about the opposite of those things, you can see that they're sort of they're marginalized in ways. So women's studies is important for re-seeing or reframing the world. It's important for everyone, because what it does is inside this telescope, it puts the marginalized voices. It puts those triangle heads, the stick figure from the last talk, hopefully you remember, right in the middle. Instead of leaving them out on the edges of the box, it puts it right in the middle, and it tells these different histories, different types of science, or different politics, so that we can kind of re-see or rethink about events. So maybe you have a favorite point in history, and maybe it's a war. And usually when we learn about war, we learn about the battles, right? And we learn about the winner. And what I take from that is that the story that gets told in history usually is about the person who wins, about the person who got the power. And so if we were to tell a feminist history maybe of that favorite war, favorite battle you have, we might hear about the group that lost. That might become, and I'm not saying we never hear about that, but it's not the most popular part of the history, right? Or we might hear about the people who didn't even fight, the people who were helping on the sidelines, or the people who were bringing messages along, or, the women who were cooking or bringing aid. So that's the kind of re-seeing, reframing, but it can be even more than that. That's just one example. And that's one of the ways that the view can be different. What does it mean when you see not just from the empowered perspective, but from all the different angles? So seeing from this marginalized voice, you'd want to look through here, you'd want to look through here, you'd want to look through here, because it's going to be a lot of different perspectives. So re-seeing is important, because if we only see through the normative lens, it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to question the naturalness of normative histories, these empowered histories that just come to seem like, oh, well, that's just the story, and that's how it's always been, and that's what I believe, and that's why. So if we don't re-see them, it just seems like it is that way because it is that way. And that can apply to science, like you saw this last week, or policy, like you're going to read about this week. And in the end, after you read these, feminist revisions and re-seeings of policies or science throughout the course of this class, you may find that you agree with the dominant ideology, and that is fine. But the goal here of a feminist project like a women's studies class is to uncover how and why that norm exists and who benefits from maintaining it, right? So why do we only hear about the person who won the battle? Or why is this the policy that is enforced, and why is this the way that we hear about it? So those are the kinds of things that I want you to think about as you read. So as you embark upon this next unit, it's a unit that can be a touchy subject, especially right now in this political climate. We're looking at population control and reproductive rights, but we're not just looking at it from a domestic perspective, we're looking at it globally. What is the impact globally? And I want you to think about the content and source of your previous knowledge. So what did you know about this before? Did you know nothing? Did you know a lot? Did you know rumors? Did you know about it from television, from your parents, from church? And all of those things are fine. But just think about how you knew it and why, and where you got it from. And then as you read, how are the readings different? What is the story you're being told from these readings? How is it different? And how do those two telescopes, because this first is most likely going to be a normative story that you've received essentially as your beliefs. And here, what you're reading about are the marginalized stories, the less known histories. And what you're going to read about throughout them, you're going to notice issues of race, class, nation, and gender. So we're not just learning about gender, we're not just learning about women and men. We're also learning about how these issues impact people of different races, people of different classes, and people differently depending on where they live in the world. So think about how your place and space as sitting, in a dorm room or in your home, in Bowling Green or wherever you are, whatever your identity is, how has that changed the way you understand this content versus this transnational global perspective? And what does that mean for you? And what does that mean for the future issues that we're going to learn about? So I know this was a lot, but really it's an intro to the way that we're seeing in this class, and I hope it's been helpful to you. As always, let me know if you have any questions. Shoot me an email.